when we exposed this material, and I think solved the riddle of several of the questions that had been asked, found extra tracks, documented the right-left pattern, the length and consistency of the trail. Many were pressed with coming up with an answer. What do you say? Well, the typical thing they say, just predict it. Well, you need more evidence. You can always say that. You need more evidence, and they do. And so in 2000, with the drought in this area, we noticed that this trail that's coming across what's called the Patton, the trail that's going across it here, we could see more of it because the water had gone down. And so we decided to pump the river dry. And so we got quite a few pumps and 30 or 40 people down there pretty regularly for over a 3-month period. And with a lot of work, a lot of shovels, a lot of movement of dirt and watering a lot of farmers' fields on either side of the river, we pumped it dry and followed that trail and exposed the longest consecutive dinosaur trail on the American continent. 154 dinosaur tracks, over 500 feet long, and they're not only the longest trail, but they may be the clearest and most spectacular trail. The sharp detail is just awesome. Now, it really infuriated the fella at the state park who had gotten his PhD studying these tracks that a creationist made such a find right under his nose. But we know what dinosaur tracks look like and excavated the longest trail on the American continent. Only one other in the world longer, in Turkmenistan. There's nothing here that looks like dinosaur tracks at all, but when you go up ahead, it crosses this trail of human tracks that are very consistent in length, right-left pattern, all 5 toes, instep and heel. Then we presented that, and guess what they said then? Well, you need more evidence. And, okay, let's try the platform up ahead this time, and we moved ahead. And this platform, we had to go down 3 or 4 layers till we got to the print layer, and sure enough, there's about 100 dinosaur tracks on this platform with 15 human tracks going right through the middle of it. Different individual. This one was consistently about 10 inches, but the right-left pattern is obvious. And we look at a close-up here of the center, and we see 2 tracks that are slightly raised, like the dinosaur footprints, but you can see that they match on either side. But the one on the right looks like something stepped in the back of it, doesn't it? And it's depressed. It's not raised. It came along after the infill had filled in the other tracks. Looking at a close-up of the one on the right, we'll see there is that duck-shaped dinosaur track that matches the one next to it perfectly, but again, the depressed track within it is just perfect. And if we had enough dark, you could actually count the knuckles and the toes here. And that's in a sequence of 15 in a right-left pattern. Okay, you want some more evidence? It just keeps piling up, and they keep evading. I think we have just very exciting evidence to confront the evolutionary theories here. We went back to the burdick track. This one was one that had to be carved. It was too good to be true because, it looked awfully good. So I said, is there some way we can tell if this is carved or not? Well, when you section across it, sometimes, as indicated in the question a moment ago, you can see disturbed material underneath the surface. And so we sectioned, as you can see, several places. Here is a section at the heel, and in the center you can see the displaced, disturbed material. Is this a carved track? Now, this is original impression. Carving would cut across rather than corresponding with the disturbed material. We presented this at a science meeting in Dallas, and it got rather quiet. And then finally one person said, well, this is obviously a real track, but it must be a dinosaur track that somebody carved toes on. And I'm glad he did that, because then we proceeded to section across the toes, as you can see here, And this is a real reach, because sometimes you section a dinosaur track and you see nothing. But we were lucky with the fine-grained limestone preserved a lot of detail. Here is a section across the toes, and especially there at the great toe. You can see the following contours rather than cutting across them. Looking at a close-up here, and actually there are structures under each of the toes, but very dramatic at the great toe. And so we verify even at the toes that this is not a carved track. Then we get a new set of objections. They say, well, but it's too broad at the front, it's too narrow at the heel, and look at the center, it's raised. Tracks are not supposed to be raised in the middle. And of course, they had no idea what tracks are supposed to look like, and we didn't either, and so we went out and did some science. We got some junior high kids to make some tracks in the concrete, and we found out that standing tracks and walking tracks and running tracks are pretty easy to distinguish. They all look different. And what we're looking at here is a running track. Here is a little 12-year-old girl that made these tracks, running both toward and away from us. Looking at two here going in opposite directions. We can see the broad front here and the toes that are spread out, the narrow heel, and look at the raised center. When you're running, you push off with your toes, and so you have a broader front, and you rock over the center and leave the... We didn't know that, but what we learned indicated that if it were different, it would be wrong. The Burdick track is a very good running track. Difficult even to make one that good today, but the same general configuration. Also in the area, we had a large cat track. There were 7 of these. Dawkins said a large mammal skull. I think a large mammal foot would fit the bill as well. This one is large. We talked about large animals the other evening. This one's 9 inches across. Big cat. And that would utterly destroy, according to Dawkins' criteria. We sectioned here across this, which they'd have to say was carved. And again, you see the following contours across the pad of the cat track, showing that this is not carved either. This is a turvy fossil. All of this, of course, around Glen Rose. Let's go down to Sonora, Texas. Here is a sequence of 3 tracks. One of them, you can see very clearly, is not just erosion in the rock, but very much like a human track. There are 9 of them in a right-left pattern that can be followed there at Sonora. Up in the Panhandle at Stinnett, Texas, there's been on display for about 30 years a rock slab there in the center of the courthouse that obviously looks like a human foot in the Permian rock. This is supposedly 100 million years older than the ones at Glen Rose. Well, this has to be carved. It's just too clear, the little small foot and then the big one. But look at the thin layer that's revealed here by the broken section, and compare it with the depth of the track looking sideways, and you can see that the depth is considerably deeper than that little thin layer, and if it were carved, what would happen to that little thin layer? It would penetrate, wouldn't it? And it didn't. So we can see good indication this is not a carved track. We have found out where this came from, the area. We've done a lot of research. We're doing an excavation beginning in 2 weeks there at Stinnett, and hope to find some more in place. But we don't find them just at Glen Rose by any means. This one is in New Mexico, again in the Permian, even worse for the evolutionists than the situation at Glen Rose. The photograph is a little bit deceitful in that you wouldn't see that picture if you walked up on it. It's an extremely shallow track, and you have to have it wet and the sun angle just right in order to get the pretty picture like this. But when you do, you can see this very obviously is a clear track, but it's one that is like the kind of footprints you'd leave when you're walking with a wet foot on a tile floor. You're not sinking down that much. You get the hourglass shape with the little dots at the end, but we recognize that shape, don't we? And that's obviously a turvy fossil. In Turkmenistan that we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of dinosaur tracks. This is from Pravda, under the headline, Human Footprints Found on Dinosaurs Plateau. Turkmenian Plateau contains more than 3,000 footprints, but among the most mysterious fact is that among the footprints of dinosaurs, footprints of bare human feet are found. We've contacted a number of Russian scientists. They don't like to talk about it, not all of them. Some of them actually do and have gotten in trouble as a result of it. We had this fellow who had published Science in the USSR, agreed to carry us there. He was head of the geology department at the University of Turkmenistan. I got the visa, wasn't cheap, ready to go, and they fired him, and he had to leave the country. When we applied for the permits, they found out we were coming. They don't like that to be known. But in this journal, he says, if we speak about the human footprint, and notice he's still just a little bit equivocating here, it was made by a human-like animal. He's not really sticking his neck out there, but obviously so. Incredibly, the footprint is on the same plateau where there are dinosaur tracks. And he's led 3 expeditions there to investigate. He has offered to carry us sneaking across the border from Kazakhstan, where he is now. It's about 6 miles from Afghanistan, and we decided that we're going to wait a little while. This amazing fossil is from the Glen Rose area. This is my daughter's finger underneath. We recognize what that looks like, but there are lots of rocks that just happen to look like things accidentally. And so we wanted to see if there's any interior structure. Sometimes you find that in fossils, sometimes you don't. And so we sectioned here at a severe angle to get more information to see if there's any interior structure there. And sure enough, right at the intersection, right where it's supposed to be, we see the bone material in the center of this fossil finger. This is Dr. Dale Peterson of Oklahoma City. The last time I heard him lecture on this, it was an hour-and-a-half lecture, and you don't want to know all about that, but he did the CAT scans and traced ligaments from one end to the other, and he has absolutely no doubt, as a professional anatomist, that this is a human finger. A little further south, 100 miles south of Glen Rose, we go near London, Texas, down toward Junction, Fredericksburg, in that vicinity. And in this picturesque spot, a number of years ago, a gentleman was fishing and looked at a rock and saw something sticking out of it and picked it up and hit it, and lo and behold, it's got a hammer in it. And the rock from this area, you look on all the geologic maps, this is Lower Cretaceous, the same formation at Glen Rose, but lower down in the formation, supposed to be 140 million. But this is steel with an iron hammer. It's not hammer steel, it's a different type. No hammer is sold today made of this. The wooden handle is partially colified with quartz and calcite crystals in it, encased in the Cretaceous sandstone. I don't think the dinosaurs made that, but it's found in the rocks with the dinosaurs. Up in Oklahoma, we found this iron pot, which was in the coal that's supposedly 300 million years old. Man, according to the evolutionists, been around maybe 1 million, 2 million, depending on how you define him. But 295 million, you've got an iron pot. And this is the affidavit of the fellow who was working in the utility department there, stoking the big furnace, and he took a sledgehammer and broke the coal open, and out fell the pot with the cast and the mold on either side. Not supposed to be there. Similar situation here with this bell that was found in North Carolina a number of years ago, encased in coal, again with the cast and mold on either side. A close-up shows that this is not like things that we know about today, but it was encased in the coal. We have not only an affidavit from him, but he passed a lie detector test with flying colors that his story was true. And so the evidence just accumulates. Travel with me to Utah. This is near the Four Corners area, near Blanding, Utah, under the arches at Natural Bridges National Monument. And here, Dr. Swift down there, who was working with me, is pointing up where the arrow is to a protected area where the Anasazi Indians did their petroglyphs about 1,000 years ago, according to the park rangers. And you climb up there on that little ledge and look at that, and you see a number of the petroglyphs. It's covered with heavy desert varnish so that it's difficult to photograph. But right over my head, you see the Anasazi warrior and then the snakes. But then right beside me, if we highlight the significant area, you can see the dinosaur, which even the secular archaeologists have acknowledged sure looks like a dinosaur, and covered with the varnish so that the antiquity is really not questioned. We go not too far from there, but over into Colorado, we see the three-horned dinosaur with the frill on its back. It looks more like a triceratops than the people. Look like people. This is done by the Fremont Indians, who were contemporary with the Anasazi. And then we go to the Grand Canyon. We see what appears to be in the shape of maybe an Allosaurus. Someone shot him in the tail, which shows you what it looks like if you break through that heavy desert varnish, which indicates its antiquity. There was a write-up by a representative for the American Museum of Natural History in 1924 of this site describing Indians drawing dinosaurs, though they wouldn't do that today. Not because the evidence is not there, they just wouldn't do it. We traveled down to Peru, and this is Dr. Javier Cabrera, who was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima, retired to be cultural anthropologist in Inca, ancestor of the conquistadors, has a big 300-year-old castle there on the town square, and has a collection of Inca burial stones that begun to be made by his father back in the 30s. He's continued that collection. These are stones that are buried with in the tombs with the Incas, and they have scenes carved over them, most of them. He has a collection now of over 11,000 of these burial stones. About a third of them are the most disgusting pornography you've ever seen, but about a third of them have dinosaurs on them. Here is one in place in the tomb, but looking at a close-up of these stones, you can see the rather artistic rendition of the dinosaur. Interestingly, this one has the dermal frills on its back. When Mr. Sinclair did his sign with the dinosaur, he didn't know that it had frills on its back, but they did it right. This was written up in Geology magazine in 1992 for the first time, and we found them well preserved. But there are thousands of these stones. This is one of the larger ones. Again, rather artistically rendered. Looking at a close-up, you can see the dinosaur in the upper right-hand corner with the man foot in his mouth. All shapes and sizes and types of stones and styles of rendering, certainly not done by the same individual. Some of them are almost oriental looking, and some of them rather literal looking. Here's one with a number of different species on it, but thousands of them. We have a number of others who have collected as well. We have a collection at the Aeronautical Museum in Lima. There were hundreds here. There are 40 that are left. They've been raided, I think sold maybe illegally. But you can still see the stones, some of the ones that are not as elaborate and beautiful as in the Cabrera collection, but obviously recognizable. Still in the National Aeronautical Museum, there's also a display in the Naval Museum and at least 2 other museums that I know of in Peru. Some of them are still being excavated. This was one that was excavated in 2006 that is in the artifact room. It has 2 dinosaurs on it. Slightly different type stone from Cabrera's, raised instead of incised, but still the same general picture. Also in the tombs you find burial cloths with the same kind of motif there. Obviously, the big claws and the teeth representing dinosaurs. You see it on their pottery. That's relatively easy to date. These are dated at about 2,500 years ago. These are the Moshe Pots, and the style is well known. and documented and represented in the national museums. This one's in the National Museum in Lima. It says circa 2,500 years ago. Up in northern Peru, you have a good deal of gold in some of the ruins and tombs. This is a death mask, but look on either side of the face. Again, the dermal frills across the back, the tail curling up over, and the huge teeth. These people were seeing dinosaurs 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Now, we're told that we've known what dinosaurs look like for maybe, well, the first ones found in 1820, we didn't know what they looked like very well. The restorations were silly. After the turn of the century, early 1900s, we got a fair idea, and really not an excellent idea. And, well, 1992, we learned the Brontosaurus type had frills on its back. These people didn't show a gradation in learning. They got it right from the start. Likewise in Mexico, we've made a number of trips there in Central Highlands near Acambaro in the state of Guanajuato. Dr. Swift and I have been down there a number of times investigating. It took that many times to get through all the bureaucracy. When we got there, they were being hidden in the back of the police department. But it was a collection made by Waldemar Julsrud back in the early 1900s of some 30,000 ceramic figurines, about 10% of which are of dinosaurs, but a wide range of animals and creatures. Some of the Brontosaurus type were standing up. We didn't know that until recently. Bacher's book, Dinosaur Heresies, published in '86, was really the first one who suggested that. And then, of course, Spielberg convinced us all they stood up. But this is exactly the way they're rendered by the artist, and these date to well before the time of Christ from several sources. Again, there are thousands of them, and the styles indicate far more than one artist. One of the professors from the University of Texas at Arlington, who is an art professor, said there were at least 100 different artists represented in the collection, would be his estimate. This is my wife's favorite. Obviously, if you've got one that looks like a dinosaur, a man did it, but sewing them together is interesting. Man and dinosaur obviously live together. You pick up any of the dinosaur books today, and how does it start out? Millions and millions of years ago. And then the second paragraph says, no man ever saw a dinosaur. And that's just like you can't write a dinosaur book unless you start that way. It ain't so. Year before last, we traveled to Cambodia, following evidence that had been forwarded to us by one of the tour guides there who had seen our website. And we had done some research and confirmed a good bit of what he was telling us. In the upper part of Cambodia, we see the ancient Khmer Empire had built just spectacular temples, maybe the largest and most beautiful in the world. And one of the greatest monument builders was Vardaman the Seventh. He's almost idolized. This is a picture that I took there in Phnom Penh of the Buddha-like pose. He began to rule in 1181 and built Tapram and dedicated it in 1186. This was dedicated to his mother. It was a Buddhist monastery. And so we know who and when and all the specifics. Well, on the stone in this temple, a very beautiful, picturesque place, you see carvings, and they're stone carvings that cover just about every square inch of it. But just inside the front entrance, in the corner here that the arrow points to, you can see a series of animals from the jungle. And notice in the series there is a perfect stegosaurus in a temple from over 800 years ago. And we're supposed to have known what dinosaurs looked like for about 150, and then they've been gone 65 million. I believe there's something wrong with that story. I don't want any comments about two fossils here, or two dinosaurs. They're just one. But it is more proof of the co-occurrence of humans and dinosaurs. Let's think about some significance here of this, acknowledged by the evolutionists before we conclude. Louis Jacobs from SMU is president of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, one of the most representative, respected paleontologist in the country. And in his book, Quest for the African Dinosaur, he brings up the subject of the co-occurrence of men and dinosaurs. He said, such an association would dispel an earth with vast antiquity. The entire history of creation, including the day of rest, could be accommodated in the 7 biblical days of the Genesis myth. This is, of course, his view of it. Evolution would be vanquished. Here's the implication, the significance, if you were to document this. And, of course, I think he's right. We go back to the statement by Stephen Stanley that we referred to earlier, the topsy-turvy fossil man, and look at a fuller context of his quote. He said, there's an infinite variety of ways in which, since 1859, the general concept of evolution might have been demolished. Consider the fossil record, little-known resource in Darwin's day. The unequivocal discovery of a fossil population of horses in Precambrian rocks would disprove evolution. More generally, any topsy-turvy sequence of fossils would force us to rethink our theory, and yet not a single one has come to light. As Darwin recognized, a single geographic inconsistency would have nearly the same power of destruction. But these are his terms: destruction, destroy, disprove. That's the implication if you find humans and dinosaurs together specifically. A single geographic inconsistency. It's interesting to listen to what the evolutionists themselves say about what this would mean. Stanley says it would disprove evolution. Dawkins, referring to another find, says evolution would be utterly destroyed. And then Jacob says evolution would be vanquished. Now, that's not my analysis. That's the leading evolutionists across the country. That's what they say such evidence means. If you've got a single geographic inconsistency, well, I believe we've shown more than a single geographic inconsistency. The Malachite man with the 10 perfectly modern human skeletons in the same formation as Dinosaur National Monument, fossil footprints in Texas and New Mexico and Turkmenistan, 3 different places in Texas, the dinosaur petroglyphs, Peruvian Mexican dinosaur artifacts, the burial stones, the cat track and the hammer, and that's a whole lot more than a single geographic inconsistency, and I think the implication is just as they suggested. It demolishes. It is, the column itself is an abstraction that's put together based on the assumption of evolution, useful as a model that we can test against the real world, and when we do, we find it fails. It is contradicted. It's not proof. It is demonstration of what ought to be that isn't. And let's conclude with a statement by Nova, who came to Glen Rose, looked at the same pictures that you looked at. The people that photographed it and interviewed us were excited. They thought they had some earth-shaking news and went back, and their editor wouldn't allow them to publish it. They did publish a brief presentation called God, Darwin, and the Dinosaurs, and mentioned dinosaur footprints side by side with humans. Finding them would counter evidence, they said, that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct, which is, of course, what's taught in the textbooks. It would counter that and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. Nova knows what that means. And therefore, they said in this blurb, there's nothing at Glen Rose that looks anything like a footprint, a human footprint. Now, you can decide for yourself whether that's true. If there's something there that does look like, and we've shown that there are human footprints there and that that's the most reasonable conclusion, then this is what it means, according to the evolutionists themselves.